Here we go. Good evening. Welcome. Good evening. We took Alana by surprise there. Sorry about that, Alana. Um, so good evening and welcome to Smart Elections. This is the Election Protection Forum. I'm Lulu Friesdat. I'm the Executive Director of Smart Elections.
And I'm Bennie Smith, Shelby County Election Commissioner and Technical Advisor for Smart Elections.
You're going in and out there on your audio a little bit, up and down.
Let me turn it up. Is that better?
Just so it's consistent.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay. So we have a really moving evening for you tonight. We are going to replay the January 6th vigil, and we have people who participated and shared their feelings in the chat, two really articulate and respectful guests who we will introduce, and I encourage you to stay with us for the entire forum. We were on Zoom, and so some of the pictures are going to be a little bit small. We went to a full screen so that you could see the ASL interpreters. So the video isn't necessarily always the best, but I think the content is really the heart of the matter and people's voices listening and sharing, and that's what really counts. The evening is about an hour and a half long, and we're actually going to play the whole thing tonight. So you'll have an hour and a half long program. And I want to also just let you know kind of what's coming up after tonight. So we're having our election protection forum every 2 weeks on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. as we always do. And the next forum on January 25th is going to be a forum called Who is Interested in Fair Elections? And we are going to explore some of the work that is being done on both sides of the political spectrum to try to make sure the elections are in one party's favor or another. There's been a lot of coverage of what the Republicans are doing. They are trying to change the rules in many states. They have people running for local election offices, and in some cases trying to change who decides actually, like who calls the election. But there's also other things happening on the other side. The Green Party has pointed out that the Democrats are busy trying to change the rules in regard to what third-party candidates can do, and a lot of that is in the Freedom to Vote Act. So we're going to be covering both of those because we are nonpartisan. We'll try to bring you a balanced perspective, something that you really won't get anywhere else, and we encourage you to join us. That's on January 25th at 7 p.m. And then starting on February 8th, we are going to reboot the Election Protection Forum, and we're going to start really with an overview of the basics and take you all the way through to when we start doing oversight, nonpartisan oversight at the midterms. So I really encourage you to jump on and join us for those forums. And we're going to be reaching out to groups and asking if your group wants to co-sponsor the Election Protection Forum and encourage your members to attend so that we have as many people involved as possible. And so we'll be sending you more information about that. The best way to find out about that is to go to our website and sign up for our mailing list. So I encourage you to get on the mailing list and to really stay with us for this process. So we're going to introduce our one of our guests. We had Kyle Becker, who's the CEO of Becker News, a right-wing website. And we also had Andrea Miller, who is the founding board member of Center for Common Ground. And Andrea is going to be with us in the chat tonight. Kyle was not able to join us, but he did really, I think that Kyle had a really positive experience, and we had some good dialogue both during and afterwards with him and hope to be working with him some more. So right now I'm going to introduce Andrea Miller, and we're really delighted to have her here. And Andrea, we are going to put you in the hot seat. That is where we like to make sure that we can see our guests. It's really a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Lulu. It is very good to be here. Always good to see you, Bennie.
It is great to see you. You're one of the primary reasons I'll do stuff like this now.
Andrea is a hero to many of us. Andrea, yes. I want to give you a quick chance to shout out. I know you have some really ambitious things going on, and anything that you would like people to know about, I want to give you this opportunity to share some of the ambitious projects that you're working on, and to let people know how to get in touch with you and follow your work further. So Andrea is at the Center for Common Ground. So I'm gonna, that's their website there. And if you want to follow them on Twitter, they are at CTR4CMN Ground. And I just want to give you a chance to shout out what's going on. I know you have a lot.
Well, I'll make this really, really quick. The Texas primary is March 1st. So we are starting our postcarding campaign on January 14th. You can go to our website, go to actions, and postcarding is in action. At the beginning of February, we'll begin our phone banking and texting campaign. We are waiting for the Texas County Boards of Elections to announce the location of early voting. Early voting for that March 1st primary will begin in February. And then for the rest of the year, we are going to be working in 9 states in 2022. Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, and our new state for this year, Louisiana.
And what are your plans for those states? When you say you're working in those states, what are the plans?
Well, what we do is we turn out the BIPOC vote, the Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, AAPI, Asian American, Pacific Islander. We make sure that voters, especially rural voters, have the information they need to be able to vote. So with early voting in many states, early voting is really only on websites. So if you don't happen to have the internet, or you're older and you don't really use computers, you may not know where early voting is. The rules on vote by mail change or did change in many states in 2021. So we make sure voters who are eligible to vote by mail know how to vote by mail, know whether or not they need a witness signature, know how to actually prepare their ballot, and are there drop boxes in their community where they can drop it off, or when they need to drop it off at the registrar or early voting. So that means it requires a lot of research, not only for every state, but every county that we're supporting in that state, because all the counties have different locations, different voting times. They're all supposed to be playing by the same rules, and occasionally we find counties that aren't. So then we have to report them.
So there's a lot of support work that you do. And if
Yes.
people want to get involved or get in touch with you, they should go to your website.
They can go to the website, and whatever they want to do they want to postcard? Do they want to make phone calls? Do they want to text? We have information there on how you can join those various campaigns.
I want to drive Notorious RBG.
I don't think we're going to let you drive it, but when it is heading down south, you might get an opportunity to get a ride on it.
Okay.
I take it that's your bus.
That is our 27-foot pink and turquoise RV.
Oh my God. Wow. Okay. And I just want to let you know, I want to introduce our ASL interpreters. This is Alana Pilardi, and the interpreters are courtesy of Center for the Disability Rights, and that is their website, cdrnys.org. And we have another ASL interpreter, Emilio. Let's see if I can get Emilio on here for a second so that we can introduce him. Let's see, now we got tons of us on here. There's Emilio. Okay, so we're very grateful to have them here. And we'll just keep Alana going for the moment. And I do want to take a moment and do our video descriptions. We haven't, it's really important for us to keep doing that. Alana, do you want to go first? Oh, I have Amelia up there.
Sure. My name's Alana. I am female, white. Um, I have shoulder-length brown hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a headset and a blue background.
Okay, Bennie, you're up.
I'm Benny Smith. I'm a male black. I'm sitting in the Matrix. And and I also have all black. I have on all black today, and the screens behind me changed, but now it's all black.
I'm Lulu Friesdat. I'm a pale white woman. I have long brown hair, but it's up in a sort of dew today, and I'm wearing a big headset with a microphone, some tiger eye bead necklace, and a brick wall behind me. Andrea, you're in the hot seat. You get to do a visual description.
I'm Andrea Miller. I am a Black woman. I wear very large glasses, trifocals, as a matter of fact. I have really long dreads that are pinned on top of my head in a bun. And I am wearing a yellow and black, like a bumblebee, plaid flannel work shirt. And I am currently in my home office.
Okay. So now we're going to start the vigil, and I really encourage people to put their comments into the chat. There's times we're asking people about 3 different elements: their feelings about January 6th, their thoughts about the underlying causes, and their ideas about how we can have peaceful elections going forward. And we'll be in the chat and we'll be responding to any comments that you have. And we hope that you are that you're going to be able to share your feelings, and that you are going to feel moved, inspired, comforted, motivated, and connected, as many people did when they watched the vigil with us. So I welcome you to the replay of our January 6th vigil. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us at this January 6th vigil. This is a vigil sponsored by Smart Elections. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to elevating election reform to an urgent national priority. Our guests tonight are Kyle Becker, CEO of Becker News, and Andrea Miller, a founding board member of the Center for Common Ground. And I will introduce them more fully shortly. I really welcome all of you to the evening. I think it's so important that we take this opportunity to listen and share and heal. And those are the actions that we're going to be taking tonight, to try to listen deeply and empathetically to each other, and to focus on how we can make sure that we have peaceful elections in the midterms in 2024 and going forward. I think most of us experienced January 6th as a tragedy, as something that was shocking, and that we never want to see happen again. And we're going to be watching a little bit of the footage from the event. And I'll also be reading prayers from different faith groups throughout the evening. So I'd like to start by reading a prayer that my sister sent me. It's called the Misha Barak.
and it's a very simple Jewish prayer. I thought it was such a really sweet, simple sentiment when she sent it to me, and this is just one part of it. Bless those in need of healing with the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say amen. And I think that's a lovely way to start, so we can focus on the renewal of our political body, our electoral body, and the renewal of our spirit. So I want to just read briefly some of a description about what happened on January 6th. I've tried to choose sources that are fairly neutral and not from one particular political point of view or another. The point of this evening is not to have a political agenda, but for us all to share our feelings about what happened. And we all are individual humans, and so we have different understandings about what happened. But I think it's important to try to have some sort of baseline understanding of what the events entailed. So I'm just going to read briefly a couple paragraphs from this document from the Senate, which examined the Capitol attack and also reviewed the security failings. And this is a fairly straightforward account. I will say that this account says that 7 people died on January 6th. There was actually controversy about that. The New York Times reported 5 people died. Other people reported more. I think it depends on, what you consider the cause of death. One of the most tragic aspects, I think, of the day was that 4 police officers later committed suicide. And I think that there's no arguing that that is a real tragedy. So here is from this report, the executive summary. On January 6, 2021, the world witnessed a violent and unprecedented attack on the US Capitol, the Vice President, members of Congress, and the democratic process. Rioters, attempting to disrupt the joint session of Congress, broke into the Capitol building, vandalized and stole property, and ransacked offices. They attacked members of law enforcement and threatened the safety and lives of our nation's elected leaders. Tragically, 7 individuals, including 3 law enforcement officers, ultimately lost their lives. Rioters were intent on disrupting the joint session, during which members of Congress were scheduled to perform their constitutional obligation to count the electoral votes for the President and Vice President of the United States and announce the official results of the 2020 election. Due to the heroism of United States Capitol Police officers, United States Capitol Police officers, along with their federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, the rioters failed to prevent Congress from fulfilling its constitutional duty. In the early hours of January 7th, the President of the Senate, Vice President Pence, announced Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris as the President-elect and Vice President-elect of the United States. And I think that it's good for us to watch a few minutes of footage of this event, because the footage really speaks of what happened in a way that I don't think anything else can really convey. And so I'm going to play just a couple minutes of some of the footage that was put together by the New York Times. That I think it's a long amount of footage that they put together, but this is some that I found was really really frightening. So I'm going to share this with you now.
First, we'll go to the Crypt in the centre of the Capitol, below the rotunda. The mob is already at its entrance. If they get through here, they will more easily fan out across the building. Rioters jostle with police here for 6 minutes, and then flood through. It's now 2:24 p.m, some 90 minutes after the siege began, and the mob is about to overrun the building. Stop the steal! Stop the steal! As this is happening, and as thousands more swell outside, Trump composes a tweet, not to calm his supporters, but to blame his vice president. He writes, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution." At this very time, Pence and his family are being taken to safety, along with an aide who's carrying the country's nuclear launch equipment. At 2:25 p.m, there's another major breach on the opposite side of the building, the east side. Rioters have been battling a handful of officers at these doors for almost half an hour. The tide turns when rioters who came through the crypt reach these doors and pull them open. Then an active duty Marine Corps officer, Christopher Warnagiris, keeps that door open for the mob to flood in. Just as elsewhere, this crowd is a mix of die-hard Trump supporters, but also more organised groups like the Oath Keepers, who move in formation here toward that east side entrance. The Oath Keepers and their supporters continue to update each other on the Zello chat app.
The House is in recess. We're going to yank them out of their seats.
The group enters the Capitol together. Proud Boys are near them, including Joe Biggs, the organiser we saw earlier. He's entering the building for a second time. The Oath Keepers fill the rotunda, along with hundreds of other rioters.
Took over the Capitol, overran the Capitol. We're in the fucking Capitol, bro.
Now the police inside the building are completely outnumbered and call for backup.
We need some additional squads in the rotunda. It's outburst about 200 people.
Throughout the Capitol, staffers have barricaded doors to keep the mob out. In Nancy Pelosi's chambers, staffers rush inside a conference room and lock two doors behind them. Just 12 minutes later, rioters outside head straight for her offices and pile in. Huddled together under a table, Pelosi's staff record what's happening.
We need Capitol Police, I think, coming to the hallway. They're pounding on doors trying to find her. Yeah.
One rioter tries to break into that same room. Inside, staffers are silent as they record pounding.
So I think that gives us a sense of the day and just how incredibly serious it was. I think one of the moments that strikes me the most deeply is when they say that the aide carrying the nuclear device trigger was rushed out of the building. I mean, that really just tells you how incredibly serious the situation was. It's very, very upsetting. So we're going to move to our first portion of the evening, which is sharing our feelings about what happened. And what I think would be lovely is if everybody who's here who would like to can just put into the chat maybe one or two adjectives to describe how you felt that day, or even watching the footage just now. Just a simple, your own personal feelings, nothing political, just how it made you feel. You can go ahead and put it into the chat. And I'll start. I think it made me feel scared. So we had a sense there, incredulous, sick, horrified, shocked and very sad, shocked, helpless, angry, disgusted. So those are some of the adjectives that people shared. And I'd like to go now to our guests because I think it's really helpful for us to have some perspective. These are both leaders in their community who are respected, and we're very grateful for them coming and being here with us today. We're going to start with Kyle Becker. Kyle is the Becker News CEO. He's a former writer and associate producer at Fox News of the #1 top-rated primetime cable news show there. He's a former director of viral media and senior managing editor for an award-winning startup website, the Independent Journal Review, which garnered more than 30 million unique visitors a month and won awards for that. He led editorial and social media teams that had some of the top 2020 election coverage engagement on Facebook. It was almost double that at the New York Times. Kyle is an influential editor and writer with over 200,000 followers on Twitter, and we're grateful to him for joining us today. Kyle, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lulu. I really appreciate your approach to having a dialogue about this very disturbing event that happened 1 year ago today. I think going through the process, I was alarmed by how it unfolded. And usually what I do is I tend to like really hyper focus in on what is going on with every little event and just the way it unfolded. So I think I was watching C-SPAN, which is a pretty good network to turn to when you're watching official events, because they're very professional. They don't really get into the editorializing about the event. They're just giving you the play-by-play so you can understand the process of how it's unfolding. So they'll explain to you how the vice president and what his role as president of the Senate is. They'll explain to you what the speaker's role is. And I think this is very important as Americans that we kind of get to the basics of the facts of how these things unfold, as even a backdrop to how disruptive the extremists who came in, who caused disruption and chaos, but also the bomb threats that happened at the RNC and the DNC, which happened prior to that, which also fueled sort of a panicky response to what was going on among most Americans. So I think that it was just very unprecedented in our lifetime that we had election challenges before, but nothing accompanied by violence at the Capitol, of confrontation, of people yelling, and who were actually all the way up to the building, which I think for me as a journalist, that really surprised me that they were allowed to be that close, because just scrutinizing the types of groups that were there, whether the Proud Boys, like they pointed out, the Oath Keepers, these types of groups were wanting no real civic expression of protest that any FBI assessment that I've read about them would. They're bad faith actors. They're not there to peacefully protest the way some people mixed in might have, who were about 15, 20 minutes away when the violence started at the Capitol. So this sort of mix of bad faith actors with protesters, it created a very volatile situation. And I think that the extremists were counting on pulling in the Trump supporters and aggravating them and ramping them up and causing confrontation with the police, who then fired pepper balls into the crowd, and this fueled more chaos. So I think the way that dynamic played out is sort of the textbook of how you don't want this to play out. So I think that we knew that the FBI had been monitoring these far-right extremist groups, and it's really disappointing that they knew what the intentions were, and they were not good. Riots were expected, either the January 6th and the January 20th, which they didn't turn out to be as bad as people thought on January 20th. But the FBI was prepared. On January 4th, they were preparing for this. National Guard requests got lost in the mix, and it didn't turn out to be as many National Guard troops as you might expect. And the Capitol Police seemed to be completely flat-footed and unprepared for what happened. So from my point of view as a journalist, just seeing the riots that had happened in DC in the past, like in July, seeing the riots that had taken place in other parts of the country, allowing a riot of that kind of magnitude, whether right-wing, left-wing, it doesn't matter. It's kind of unacceptable from my point of view. It just shows that the authorities who are there really, they also need to be held accountable. The far right extreme groups, yes, of course. And for some reason, they haven't been charged with insurrection. They haven't been charged with treason. So even the violent ones haven't been charged with this, which is, for me, kind of doesn't mix with the broader narrative of how dangerous this was. And we saw how dangerous it was from what Lulu was saying, or showed us with the New York Times snippets there in the video. So for me, there's a lot that doesn't add up in the partisan way that DC is approaching this and unpacking it, and really not getting all of the questions and the documents out in a very transparent and way is just leading to more distrust of the event, of what we're being told about the event, and how the stakeholders and authority figures there, the parts that they played. I'm really more concerned about this event and the way it's been politically weaponized and instrumentalized. Whereas I think an event like this, where Lulu's doing, is much more kind of level-headed and professional, and you could go back and just try to unpack it, and just see how it happened. And I think we're all disappointed, and I was alarmed. I think that was the adjective I came to: disappointed and alarmed about how it played out. And we obviously don't want to see this happen again at any place, state capitol, U.S. capitol. So I think we need to have authorities challenge them to plan ahead, anticipate this, and really be proactive and stop it from happening to begin with. And that may use a variety of tools, not just blunt force, but dialogue, working in the community, and community leaders who have their ears on the ground, and can tell you how people feel about things coming up, like the midterm elections. So I'll turn that over to you, Lulu. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Cal. And we are going to get into ideas and solutions and things like that. So I appreciate what you said, and it sounds like you've really thought a lot about it, and you're really frustrated with sort of some of the response. I'm not necessarily getting a sense of how you felt that day. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a pin in that and let you think about that. And we're going to go to Andrea, and then maybe after other people share, we might come back to you and see if, oh, right, I have to remember to change the pin. How's this? I think that'll work. Okay, so we'll come back to you, Kyle, and maybe you'll have maybe a better, maybe just kind of think it over, reach inside yourself and try to think, how did you feel that day? Or how did you feel watching it? I think that's one of the things that we're trying to give people a chance to share here is their feelings. So we're going to go to Andrea Miller now. And I just like to read you from her remarkable bio. Andrea, let me just see if I can spotlight her while I say this. Okay, Andrea Miller, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Andrea is the founding board member of Center for Common Ground. She's the executive director and founding board member of People Demanding Action, as well as the founding president of the National Women's Political Caucus of Virginia. She's a renowned digital and election strategist who previously led the Progressive Roundtable on Capitol Hill, bringing together members of Congress, activists, and nonprofit leaders. And she has successfully advocated for legislation on both the federal and state level. In 2008, she was the Democratic nominee for the Virginia 4th Congressional District. Andrea, pleasure to have you here. And I'm going to ask you if you would share your feelings about that day, about what happened on January 6th, please.
Well, Lulu, thank you for inviting me. And I come at this with kind of a couple of perspectives. Number one, I've been lobbying on Capitol Hill since 2010. So many of the members of Congress, I know them. I know those spaces. I've been in them. And another hat that I wore for 15 years is I was working on Homeland Security, emergency management, IT. So for the past 3 presidential elections, I had retired by 2020, but the previous one, I was always on deck in the Emergency Operations Center. So normally, again, I was alarmed. I was surprised that there was no response. It did not seem that DC Emergency Management had stood up for that day, and they were not monitoring. Again, for so many years, I was on deck and we were literally the eyes of the city. There are cameras everywhere in DC, and it was just shocking, alarming to literally see that all those eyes appeared to be shut, that there was no call directly from the Emergency Operations Center saying, we are going to dispatch the Capitol Police, and we're dispatching them now. We're not waiting for somebody to invite us to come in and help out. That for me was probably the most shocking thing. The I guess, Office of Emergency Management in DC, normally they activate whenever there's going to be a decent sized parade, especially with the intel about the groups that were planning on massing people in DC. So again, it was just beyond shocking, almost beyond imagination.
And how did you feel that day when you were watching what was unfolding? How did it make you feel?
Again, because my training is when there is something bad that's happening, we plan on resolving it. I think my feeling was more shock that no one seemed to be resolving it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I do want to point out that, I'm sorry, I'm still struggling a little bit with the pins. Okay, I want to point out that although people are constantly saying what a polarized country we are and how progressives and people on the left and people on the right can't agree with anything, our two main guests who are not really on the same sides of the political spectrum both have quite a bit in common. They were both alarmed and very, very shocked at the lack of response from the police and our lack of preparedness there. So I think we should never fall into that trap of thinking that we don't have anything in common. We're all humans and we do have things in common. And it's good to keep the dialogue open and keep looking for those things. So now we're going to open the floor. And if somebody would like to speak, I think the simplest way to do it is just to put your name in the chat, and then I can unmute you. And we have, what I will do is encourage people to keep their shares, I would say, within a minute to a minute and a half. The one thing to always keep in mind is that there's probably other people who also would like to share. So thank you so much. Kennedy said that they're glad we're doing this, and I am too. It's nice just to be with other people tonight. I feel more calm just to be with other people. So is there somebody who would like to share their feelings that night? I can read some of the other feelings that people put up. Jennifer Carius said, I was realizing how damaged our election system is, double standard on treatment of demonstrations, and how inept our government is in legislating a solution. So disappointment there. I was shaking after watching the video of Ashley Babbitt being shot. Thank you, Mimi. Anybody else who would like to just verbalize their feelings? Sometimes it's nice to just get it off your chest and just, say, what, how you're feeling. Andrea, do you want to verbalize that?
Well, I was very, very concerned going in today, wondering what would be happening today, and would we be seeing a repeat of what we saw last year. I was also very, very pleased with all of the gatherings that faith communities and faith actions are taking. And then I also noticed in the chat, there was a comment, would people have been able to get that close if the people that were leading the group had been Black? So that's always kind of an interesting thing when you look at the US and the response that you get when there is a group of Black people or Hispanic versus a group of white people, what the reaction would be. It's just something that is kind of always there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Rebecca Landau would like to share. Rebecca, would you like to go ahead?
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I was in Virginia for that part of the election and the attack on our democracy. And I was there working on voting rights, as well as taking care of my mother, who was in the final stages of metastatic breast cancer. And bless her heart, because she dragged herself and her canister to make sure that she voted for Biden. And all I could think that day, besides just watching what I felt has been this long disintegration, and I was very angry for those not intervening to help those inside who desperately needed help. And it was so obvious. I was very angry. And I had this tiny moment of relief that my mom was not awake to see this and what was happening. Thank you. I'm complete.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we have a request to go into gallery view instead of the speaker view. And I think Amelia is saying to me that if we want to maintain the interpreter, then we have to put it into gallery view. So I'll go ahead and do that. I think that people individually can put it into speaker view if they like. So that's a setting that you can put. If you'd like to see the person who's speaking larger, then you can go up into view on the top right corner and click speaker. And then that'll put that view, the person who's speaking will be larger. And then I think this is the way the interpreters would like us to keep it. So to make sure that that anybody who needs to see the ASL interpretation can see it. So we're going to go into the next part of our vigil, and that is thinking about the underlying causes of what happened. And one of the things that's really important, we may have very different views about what the underlying causes are. And what we're trying to do here is to listen to each other. And so I'm going to read a brief passage from one of my favorite mentors, one of my heroes, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese monk. He's somebody who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. And I've read a lot of his writings, especially on anger. I used to be an extremely angry person, and I credit some of my progress on that to Thich Nhat Hanh. And this is from a passage where he really talks about how to communicate with people when you're angry and how to listen deeply. It's from a book called Anger. It's by Thich Nhat Hanh. So the approach that he says is to be direct about your anger, to go to the other person and say, I am angry, I suffer, I don't know why you have done this to me. And then a suggestion, this was perhaps for a couple, let us sit down Friday evening and look deeply together. But it could be anyone. It could be anyone that you have trouble with and that you do have to come together and set aside to look deeply, which is what we've done tonight. And then he says, listening with empathy means you listen in such a way that the other person feels you are really listening, really understanding, hearing with your whole being. You listen, first of all, in order to give the other person relief, a chance to speak out, to feel that someone finally understands him or her. Deep listening is the kind of listening that helps us to keep compassion alive while the other speaks. So we're going to try to practice deep listening as we share our ideas about the underlying causes. And we're going to play a little bit more of the events of that night before we start. So what I want to share with you now is really moving. This was an interview with Harry Dunn. He was a Black police officer who was there that day and had to and did defend the Capitol. And it was an extremely frightening experience for him. As he shares in this interview. This was on a podcast called The Daily. So I'm just going to share, it's just audio. So I think your screen will be black, but that's okay. It's about the audio.
I was out there with a long gun, an M4, a rifle, and you're out there in an elevated position with this rifle, looking down on thousands of people. And these weren't people out there passing out pamphlets. They had bad intentions, and we know they were armed because there were guns found and confiscated and people were arrested. So imagine the ones that we didn't find. So we know they were armed. You're out there and I'm this big target, and I'm thinking to myself, I am going to get taken out. I am going to get shot.
As the crowd stormed the barricades below him, Officer Dunn says he left his position to tend to fellow officers who had come under attack.
So I'm up there helping officers that have been pepper sprayed and gassed. And that is where the first initial breaches happened. And that's when we teamed up in teams of 2 to respond inside the building to assist officers inside that needed help. Once we got word that there were people inside, we had to go because that is uncharted territory. I mean, the whole day was, but you got people inside the Capitol and Congress is in session. The vice president is overseeing proceedings. So absolutely, we got to go. This is, whoa, here we go, guys, let's go.
And describe that scene inside the Capitol as you respond.
Well, as we're responding to calls, there was an officer down. There was an officer who was trapped, surrounded by rioters. There was a call for officer needs assistance holding a doorway. And then another officer calls out, they're coming through the windows also. Then there calls for another officer down. We can't breathe, there's gas in here. They're throwing fire extinguishers. There's some kind of explosion that just went off. There's shots fired. It's chaos. The calls became so frequent and so many that we couldn't do 2-man teams anymore because there weren't enough officers to go around for people that needed assistance. So everybody, now we're just 1-man teams. And then you get upstairs and you're looking around. It literally just looked like just a free-for-all, and people just running around with their flags out. It's smoke everywhere. It's pepper spray in the air. People are hugging statues and taking pictures and yelling and screaming all in the Capitol, this sacred place, what represents a pinnacle of democracy. And you're seeing all of this, and in your mind, it's like, I cannot believe what I'm seeing right now. But you don't have time to process all that because you have to restore some kind of order.
And then this is a soundbite from Representative, sorry. This is a soundbite from Representative Raskin, Jamie Raskin, about what happened to Harry Dunn after that.
One of our Capitol officers who defended us that day was a longtime veteran of our force, a brave and honorable public servant who spent several hours battling the mob as part of one of those blue lines defending the Capitol in our democracy. For several hours straight, as the marauders punched and kicked and mauled and spit upon and hit officers with baseball bats and fire extinguishers, cursed the cops, and stormed our Capitol, he defended us and he lived every minute of his oath of office. And afterwards, overwhelmed by emotion, he broke down in the rotunda. And he cried for 15 minutes. And he shouted out, "I got called an N-word 15 times today." And then he recorded, "I sat down with one of my buddies, another black guy, and tears started streaming down my face. And I said, 'What the F, man? Is this America?'"
So that gives us a very inside perspective about what happened that day. And we're going to move on now to our section about underlying causes. And we're going to start with Andrea this time. So Andrea, I would welcome your ideas about what the underlying causes were for that day.
Well, one of the things I see people putting in the chat is people feeling a loss of privilege, people feeling that they are not being heard, people believing that they are not being taken seriously. And then you combine that with people who have their own agenda, who manage to manipulate literally the crowd into a mob mentality. So we know that there were people who arrived that day with a plan to not only breach the Capitol, but potentially to literally do harm to sitting members of Congress. There were the others that got caught up. So there are so many things that are wrong with everything that led up to this scenario, from the fact that people really do not learn how to manage anger and frustration, to the fact that people are still being taught, as Officer Dunn was called a racial slur, that it is okay to hate people of a different color, a different faith, a different political party, and just so many things. We're not taught civics. How is government supposed to work? So that when it doesn't work as we expect, people don't really know or understand. So, and then let's also go back to the original conversations we have not had in this country about race, about poverty, about education, about job loss, about loss in general. There are so many things that when you don't sit down and talk about it, it becomes a wound, and that wound festers over time. So many problems in this country, and we like to live in denial. We have a Disneyfied version of history that is not the truth of who we are or what happened. and people reach a point where they believe all those untruths. So it's very easy for them to believe something when it says, well, they've stolen this from you. Are you going to let them steal anything else? And they just build that frustration up. And then for some people, it explodes. And as I said, other people allow themselves to get swept along.
So that's a lot to unpack, Andrea, but I think what I heard you saying there was we have a lot of a demonization of the other on both
Yes.
sides, that we have a lack of true communication where we have real honest dialogue about these issues, and we have issues that build up decade after decade that fester and that we never really get true solutions for. And all of that can lead to an explosion like we saw on January 6th. Is that a sense of what you were saying?
That's a very good sense, Lulu. Very good. That's a wonderful reporter in you coming out.
I'm trying to practice deep listening here. Now, I did see in the chat that we had people concerned that we're not focused enough on election security. We are an election security organization, and I will tell you that 24/7, 365 days a year, we are normally focused on election security. Tonight, we are just stepping back from that a tad. I think we're probably going to get into that when we talk about how to have peaceful elections in 2022 and beyond. But for the moment, we're just talking about feelings and underlying causes of the event. And I encourage you to come to some of our other events. We're rebooting our forum. We have an election protection forum every other Tuesday at 7 p.m. on YouTube and on Facebook. And we will be starting really from the ground up, exploring what the different issues are with election security, laying it out very clearly for people with a curriculum style presentation and visuals, as well as adding in extra technology and information for people who are more advanced and have been studying it for years. So I encourage you to start. It's coming January 11th, Tuesday at 7 p.m. And I'll put the link to our website where you can sign up. We are very focused on election security and preventing this from happening again. And I do agree with you that that is one of the underlying causes. There were problems with we really had a hard time convincing people that the results are accurate, and we clearly have not done that yet. And part of that is because we actually do have problems with security and accuracy of elections. So just that brief little sidetrack there to answer that person's question in the chat. And then Kyle, we'd love to hear from you, some of your thoughts about underlying causes of January 6th. Thank you.
Well, I'm kind of fascinated to hear from Andrea because I studied political violence, insurgency, and terrorism at SUNY Albany in a doctoral program. And we had Homeland Security people sitting in with our classes. And so, it seems like she's shooting the prism in a lot of ways that I would also to diagnose the problem. So one of my favorite political theorists is A.O. Hirschman, who talks about exit, loyalty, and voice. And so when people don't feel like they have a voice in the system, you see they either, if they don't have the opportunity to leave their situation, then their voice can become very extreme in some cases, especially if they don't feel like they're being heard. And I think the other theorist that I think goes very well with what she's saying is Robert Putnam. Everybody, I think, from Political Science 101 studied Bowling Alone. And it's the breakdown of our civic organizations and our community organizations for us to sit face to face and know each other as Joe, know each other as Bob. And, that's just Bob being Bob, at the end of the, complaining about Biden again. And then there's, Jim over here. He's a big Trump supporter, but he's all right. He likes to run his mouth, but he's just being Jim. Well, in our, coming from the social media manager point of view, just seeing that evolve. And I became like a social media manager person, even at Fox and even before that, I see people it's really putting us in these extreme camps. I think what's happening is the way you get attention on social media is being extreme. So you keep raising the temperature, you keep raising your voice, and those people who do attract a following. And I think that's, certain personality types of people who don't feel like they're heard, they're looking for avenues to be heard. And so you have these Pied Pipers, whether it's Oath Keepers or 3%ers or, even some radical groups, let's say, they just know how to find these people. These people lack confidence a lot of times. They're frustrated. They feel ignored. They feel overlooked or marginalized, and they feel powerless in the system. And here's this powerful, quote unquote, person who's going to change the system and the circumstances for them. Of course, it's completely foolhardy or naive or illegal or reckless. But that's maybe they come to a point in their life where their personal crisis is reflected in their desire to cause a political crisis. And I just to go back, I am really frustrated. Like, I knew the FBI was monitoring for months these extremist groups. They were tapping into the NSA database. You can read it. It's in declassified House intelligence reports. So I know that they were monitoring these people, and it just seems like the lack of preparation. The FBI 4 days before, we're preparing for this. This should have never gotten this bad. So I think just, for all the leaders who see January 6th, you should just look at it as a textbook case of everything that could possibly go wrong, did go wrong. So take it more seriously, take security of our elections more seriously, talk to community leaders who have their ears on the ground, find the people who are the Pied Pipers, keep an eye on those people, talk to them even. I mean, the point is to prevent this from happening again, because whether it's, it wasn't not just Republicans have had problems with elections. I will point out Democrats in 2017, they had problems with the Trump inauguration, and we saw like Madonna and Johnny Depp and all of them that were really mad about it as well. And so the last couple of elections, we've had a big percentage of Americans, one way or the other, thought that the president was illegitimate, whether you're on the Democrat side or the Republican side. And so we can't keep going like this. So I think Smart Elections is doing the right thing, trying to get an approach to where we just all feel really comfortable and confident in our election results. But at the end of the day, the elections are not going to stop themselves, are not going to stop this from happening. It's us being more civic minded and talking to people and being out in the community in real life. And of course, the pandemic has made this an even bigger problem the last couple of years. So it's very fractious right now, but we have to look for ways to really solve this problem of talking to each other as individual people on a first name basis in your community who don't agree with you. That way, whenever you see something on social media that offends you or makes you angry, like Lulu said, you have some kind of context like, oh, I know somebody who's a really diehard Democrat voter who thinks like this, and she's all right. She's just has a lot of strong feelings about this. But at the end of the day, they're okay people, and I think that's kind of where we have to go.
Sorry about that. I think to try to summarize what you're putting out there, Kyle, a sense that the kind of national dialogue is getting more and more extreme and more loud and more aggressive because our systems encourage that. The social media systems, the media, all of the kind of dialogue. As people get louder and more aggressive and more outrageous, they get more followers, they get more attention. And so that's a kind of cycle that we don't seem to be able to break, and in fact seems to be escalating. So, and I know you work online and you've worked with that social media a lot. So I'm sure that's a problem that you face on a regular basis, is how to try to, address that and still keep followers. So that's something that I'm sure you're in the thick of. And then I also heard you talk about actual, real, meaningful conversation like we're having here, one-on-one with people. And I heard you say again about how we really need more accountability from our police force and our FBI and our law enforcement if they're going to actually try to keep these type of bad actors from having success. And I think that links back to what Andrea said and what other people have mentioned, which is that we seem to have a double standard in law enforcement in terms of whether a particular group is really considered dangerous or not. So I think that's something that's an ongoing issue with law enforcement, that the racial issues seem to get tied into, whether or not a group is really policed aggressively. Did I get us at least some of what you said there right?
Sure, I think that's it's pretty much a solid overview. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. I thought both of those were really helpful and really interesting, and I see that people are continuing to put their comments in the chat. So I'd love to give people a chance to share if they would like to. As we did before, go ahead and just put your name into the chat and I can unmute you. If you'd like to just share about underlying causes of January 6th, or you can still share about your feelings if you wanted to circle back to that. If anybody'd like to go ahead, and I can see if I can try to read some of the comments from the chat. We're trying not to just, not to comment too much on what other people are saying, but focus on our own feelings. Let's see, going back through some of this. Mimi Kennedy said the election integrity community said this all along. Set the capacity to make the results certain and publicly verifiable. I'm having a hard time, sorry, because my chat box seems very small, so I'm trying to make it a little bigger. Publicly make it publicly verifiable. People don't even notice we had paper ballots. In 2020, much more than ever. The media doesn't mention it. They prefer to talk about polarization. The nuts and bolts of those paper ballots saved us. And so what she's talking about there is the fact that many more states now are using paper ballots than previously. And that is a good thing. For example, in a state like Georgia, they were previously on an all electronic system. So at least we had paper ballots in 2020 to go back and count. I know that many of us were frustrated with the way those counts took place. I myself was very disappointed, even in like the hand count tally. The hand tallies were not publicly, transparently tracked. Instead, the actual hand tallies were put into another computerized mechanism called the Arlo. And we were told that even counties themselves didn't wind up getting their own hand count tally because it was put into this other computerized system. So there are many, many ways that we do need to improve the counts. Even though we do have more paper ballots, there's lots of ways in which those paper ballots need to be stored with good chain of custody, need to be counted and audited more accurately. And Smart Elections is fully engaged in doing that work. Perry, great to see that you'd like to share. I need to unmute you. Can you, I gotta find you here, Perry. Can you raise your hand for me, your digital hand? And then I think he'll pop up to the top of my screen. Perry Busby is a journalist in Florida, and he's written some excellent information on election security. I'm gonna ask you to unmute, Perry, so you can share with us, please. Thank you for being here. I think you're unmuted now. No, Perry, I still see you're muted. I'm asking you to unmute, but you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. First of all, Lulu, thank you for this wonderful event and time of sharing. I think sometimes we always say we're tired of hearing it until we hear other stories that help inspire and give us deeper meaning to this day. And I think that it's something that we're all searching for. I think that looking back at this day, what it does recognize for me is how lax of an understanding that we have when it comes to responsibilities of these systems and structures that we create. We seem to think in many ways that if we throw technology at it, that it begins to get on autopilot. And we've sort of taken that mindset, even when it comes to the administration of our vote. And so I think that coming out of this, one of the things that we really have to begin to look at, or that I hope that we begin to look at, is reimagining this process of voting in our lives. It's about responsibility. And yes, we tend to focus on the act of casting a ballot, but the process of voting requires all of our responsibility. And if we are to believe that all politics are local, it begins with teaching, I guess, the electorate the importance of understanding the voice even within their precincts or on their blocks. Not in a lack of privacy attacking way, but to understand if we're on one accord. I mean, how can we live on one block and not agree on the politics of the block? And I think that once we begin to understand that, I think in some ways of our local politics, and I know Andrea, you know, like me, it's hard, especially in the African community. I mean, there's so much history of having a skewed or side look when it comes to interacting with a government that in so many ways has shown itself not to be a responsible partner. But yet that is our hope every time that we vote, is that our partnership will in turn in kind be, you know, meet a leadership that understands us. And I think that even right now in Florida, we're seeing drops in voter participation. And though we're trying to contribute that to COVID and everything else, it is a lack of leadership. And it is this divide that leadership has with understanding its electorate in some of these places. And I think that that is where we have to, you know, find our true leadership. Like I said, it's sort of easy for Democrats right now to sound good when you're dealing with a party that is talking anything but logic. You know, and so that means that we've got to get better, you know, better people into the system and sort of change this idea of what our government should like in terms of its representation.
Thank you, Perry. So what I hear you saying there is personal responsibility, local connectivity, people really coming together to try to understand the system and improve the system. I think those are, did I get you there? I hope so. I think those are wonderful ideas. And I understand that Jean and Mary want to share. So Jean, if I can find you, Jean DeFort, there you go. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Then you'll have to unmute yourself. And then Mary, you'll be next, Mary Thorpe.
Hey, thank you. And thank you for doing this. If you know me, you know I'm an optimist by nature, and I am well aware and prepared that really good things come over long times with lots of hard work. But I think I am the most saddened right now by where we are a year later. I'm in Georgia, and the share of people who don't believe the election was rightly decided is larger today than it was a year ago. And that is owed in great part to choices made by Republican leadership. And you know, it's very hard to be completely nonpartisan when, in fact, there's a large cluster of people who are all behaving the same way, or largely at leadership level behaving the same way. And it's a circular discussion. I've had lots of private discussions with some of these folks, Republican legislative leaders, and they'll say, well, you know, my voters think this, so I have to take this position, you know, which, you know, but I think it's not a real problem, but my voters think it is, so I can't contradict them in public. And so the difference between the private buzz and the public noise is creating a self-fulfilling prophecy among, you know, the large majority of people who are just trying to live their lives and go about their day and do their work and take care of their families, and they're not watching news as much, and they're not super connected. But when something breaks through, when it's always kind of going, don't trust this, it's not a surprise. So the disturbing thing to me is how do we move forward when we can't even all acknowledge that what we saw in these videos and what you heard from the police officer was a bad thing and something not to be repeated. I had a conversation a week or so ago with my 20-year-old nephew, super smart guy, conservative guy. And part of the conversation was, we love that we can talk to one another, and we have been, even though he knows me to be liberal and he's conservative. But he truly believes that the primary responsibility for what we saw at the Capitol was federal instigator agents that were in that crowd, that incited the crowd. He truly believes that that's the most, the reason it got out of control. And that, for me, that's an unimaginable explanation, but that is his closely held belief. And it's because of, he's in a soundbite with one set of information, and some of us are in another one. So without a common set, access to a common set of trusted sources, I hate to sound like a really old person when I yearn for the Walter Cronkite days, but one thing it did give all of us, of all persuasions, was at least sort of a common set of facts, and this ability to go and choose your sources of information and know that those sources are not dedicated largely to sort of trying to figure out what's in the middle, not what's at either end. That's creating a civic crisis that I don't know how we get out of.
I think that's a very, very good point, Jean. And I'm just going to take this moment to answer a question that was a DM to me in the chat of, what is your position, Lulu? Was the presidential election correct or fraudulent? And I will say that it has been a long time, decades really, since I have had confidence that almost any election results were correct. And I'm sorry to have to admit that, but I just don't see the evidence. I don't see ballots being counted accurately in a way that is convincing and public and transparent. The elections might be correct or they might not be correct. But I personally, since this was a question asked to me, I personally do not have confidence. And that is one of the reasons that I work so hard on smart elections, because I want desperately to have confidence. When I see someone has won the election, I want to have confidence that the voters actually chose them. And even if it's somebody that I don't agree with, if I had confidence that that was actually the person who was chosen, I would feel better about it. So again, this is just a night for us to share our feelings. That isn't something that I would normally probably make public, but that is in fact how I feel. So Mary Thorpe, you're next on Stack. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and then hopefully you'll be able to mute yourself. You'll be able to unmute yourself and speak. And I think that Mimi Kennedy also wanted to talk. And then after that, I see Kyle would like to comment. So we'll circle back to Kyle and we'll be moving on to our next segment. Mary, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, I think I am.
Great.
I'm going to share an idea that popped into my head today. And it's probably a wild and crazy idea, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I would like to see that as part of the sentencing for some of these Stop the Steal people, including the congressman that wouldn't vote to ratify the election, be sentenced to public service to serve as election inspectors. And that way, if the next election has problems, we can blame it on them.
All right.
That's the funny part. But
all right. We're focused on underlying causes now. Did you have anything you wanted to share on that?
Well, yeah. You kind of undermined the second part of my idea. Was around here where I live, I feel that our election inspectors are very hardworking, honest, hardworking people, and that these folks could then see things from the inside, how things are run. But you kind of undermine that with your lack of faith in our election process. But if you're part of if you're not part of the solution, how does that go? If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So if we could get people involved in the election process, then they wouldn't feel so angry at it and helpless about it.
So more participation. Love that. And then Mimi Kennedy, did you want to share? I gotta locate you. Where are you, Mimi? If you raise your digital hand, you'll pop. Oh, there you are, Mimi. I'm asking you to unmute, and then you'll get to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go. Great.
Thank you, Lulu. Thank you for doing this. I'm so glad to see Andrea and Kyle. Thank you for coming and doing this. And so underlying causes, like you, Lulu, I have been on the other side of this doubt for a long time. And I wrote down number one underlying cause, suspicion. And I think about, I'm the Vietnam generation. I mean, you know, the Gulf of Tonkin, when were the hostages in Iran really released? 9/11, the weapons of mass destruction, and you know, black provocateurs, the Black Bloc during Occupy. I mean, there were many instances in which I not only suspected but knew that there were what they would call a false flag. So with Stop the Steal comes out and is furious, and it's a false flag. Sometimes I feel so guilty thinking, oh my God, you know, they learned this from us. On the other hand, when something is a lie, you need to stand up. To me, the difference is the law. We are a country of laws, not men. And the Republicans or the people who are trying to change our Constitution and make it of men or women with money, not laws, they love to use the law. And when they don't find laws that help them gain power, they're happy to go and change laws. The American Legislative Exchange Council or whatever it was, we found out about them, and they'd been changing and sharing how to change laws in states for a long time. So we've been lax in understanding how to apply the law to save democracy. And I think there's a huge difference between violence and, you know, if yelling fire in a crowded theater is illegal under free speech because it might harm somebody who gets trampled in the stampede out of the place, why isn't it illegal to erect a gallows and say we're going to go find the vice president and hang him? Like, to me, that totally crosses over the line, and that should be illegal because it's violent speech and it's perpetrating violence. I will finish with this because you so beautifully, Lulu, read Thich Nhat Hanh. And I'm always now trying to look at what's inside me that's exactly the same as the people that I think are so horrible. And in this case, my husband came in and said, did you see Dick Cheney walking into Congress to support the only Republican who went there to listen to Joe Biden's speech this morning, Liz Cheney? He walked in with her, obviously to support his daughter. This brought tears to my husband's eyes, who is a father. And I thought, my God, the rage that I still have against Dick Cheney. He sanctioned torture. He unleashed a war that burned people's faces off, our soldiers, children. You know, the horrors go on. And yet I have to look at my rage. I have to look at America as a country of laws, not men, and go, okay, he's got a daughter who's a congresswoman who's trying to do the right thing to save maybe a political party I don't agree with, but she's not saying kill Mike Pence. And they're walking in and listening to the president give a speech. So I have to quell my rage, forget about all the lies that I think someone like Dick Cheney is involved in, including his elections back when we didn't have paper and it really was a computer telling us who won. And that's how America goes forward. We are a country of laws, not men and women. Even though we're we the people, what we collaborate on is the election. Thank you for all your work, Lulu. Thank you, everybody on this call who have worked to make elections more transparent. And I do think the paper ballot made a huge difference, because even seeing it in Georgia 3 times, that was different than a computer you could never look at. And we just have to go further. But free speech should not sanction violent speech and the call to kill anybody. And I really hope that we find a way to be clear on that. Otherwise, the bullies really will scare everybody because they have the guns and they're really angry. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mimi. So what I heard you saying there is an underlying cause is an escalating rage and an inability to process our rage in a mature and meaningful way. As many times as I have doubted elections, I have never taken up arms against the government. So I think we're talking about the ability to channel anger into appropriate democratic actions there and the inability of people to do that. So, and somebody did ask me why I have doubts about the election. And I will say that I probably studied election results more than many people on this call. And many times when I have actually done either statistical analysis or actual data analysis of election results, we have found problems. So for example, we did a transparency pilot in Brooklyn and we found a polling location that seemed to have 700 more ballots scanned than voters who had signed in. We couldn't get any response on that from the New York City Board of Elections. So it's not just random concern, it's actually concern based on data that I've looked at. I'm not saying every election is wrong. I'm just saying I personally have lost a lot of confidence. Kyle, you wanted to jump in and respond?
Yeah, so like this event really, as much as any in recent memory for me, shows how cognitive biases really fall in the line and crystallize in such a way that makes it very difficult to unpack it in a way where people don't feel like they're personally threatened. So if you'll just humor me for a moment, I think the root cause of this is just identity formation and tribalism. Those two things. And there is confirmation bias going on at a very high level where just the way I'm approaching it from like a cognitive science point of view, people will just cherry pick facts all day long on both sides. Absolutely. Both sides. This is not pointing any fingers at anyone. I see the right do it. I see the left do it. I see everybody of any different persuasion do it. Libertarians, whatever you want to call them. Everybody cherry picks their own set of facts and they're personally threatened by facts that don't fit into their identity formation in their head. So if I'm coming into life or into society saying like I'm a liberal person, that means I'm a good person, and I'm equating these things in my mind, then if people who say facts that don't fit into your worldview come into mind, some people, not all, some people will reject that. It's almost Freudian, but they will reject that person based on the fact that they said, and then categorize them as a bad person because they can't accept that fact without challenging themselves. So for me, like I'm trying to be detached, almost like if you study medicine or whatever, if you look at it, you have to be dispassionate. You cannot, if you feel personally threatened by a fact, you need to challenge yourself and not lash out at other people who are coming at you with some fact that you don't like. So, if I look at 2020 in context, I look at 2001, 2005, 2017, 2020. This has been going on for a generation where we've been arguing with each other about suspect elections. And like Lulu said, this isn't the only one. Yeah, Al Franken election or whatever. Just pick your election where people are suspect about it. Elections are a way of us resolving our political differences, but they work within the context of a society that has shared values. I don't think we're as far apart in shared values between progressives or constitutional conservatives or libertarians, but we think we are because of the language convolutes our ability to talk to each other, like social media, we'll call it media language, and we'll call it real language. Like what we try to do with each other when you're really trying to form a social bond or you're really trying to connect somebody is you use real language. You don't use this jargon. You don't use these narratives. You don't use this, this sort of hyperbole, and you don't yell at somebody imagine if you talk to somebody in real life you would argue with somebody on Twitter, let's say, on your worst day when you didn't have your coffee or whatever. Imagine going up to somebody on the street and just saying you're such a liar, blah, blah, blah. Let's say on your worst day, you wouldn't do it. Why? Because that doesn't it doesn't accomplish anything. So, I mean, we have to, if we don't work to each other in our communities and civic organizations or whatever, we never get down to this real language where we have a shared reality. Okay, we have to have a shared reality. We have to know that we share values, even if we talk about them differently. We care about fairness. We care about equality under the law. We care about legitimate elections. We care about treating people the right way and treating them like fellow citizens equally across the board. Nobody discriminated against in any way, regardless of your personal background. And accountability, regardless of how much money you have or how little you have in whether the justice system or in anywhere else. So I just see it. I see the cognitive biases come out, and I get frustrated. And we have to really talk about this. We have to do a better job in our education system, teaching people what cognitive biases are. Teach them what confirmation bias is. Teach them how to know what a trustworthy source is and how to find it yourself, and not rely on the media, no matter what kind of media. I don't care what part of the spectrum it is. Find it yourself. Be real citizens again. And that means participation. If you go back to Aristotle, right? You have to participate in society to be a citizen. And if you're not participating, actually, if you think just showing up on election day one time every 2 years or whatever is participating in our society or in our political or in our polity, the way that the Greeks thought, you're wrong. That's not what it means. So justice doesn't just happen once every 2 years. You have to live it, right? So anyway, that's just my response. We have to stop compartmentalizing things the way we are and putting people in the boxes or whatever. Just treat people like human beings. That's it. And that's what will solve this ultimately.
Those are great points. Really appreciate you stating that, Kyle. So we're going to move on to our next segment now, which is talking about how to ensure that we have peaceful elections going forward. 2022 midterms are coming up, and the 2024 presidential election after that, as well as many local elections. So I'm going to read another passage. This is from a Thich Nhat Hanh book called Peace is Every Step. I don't know if you have me in your speaker view, you could probably see that. And then we'll have a brief sharing about how we think we're going to have peaceful elections. So this was written in the 20th century, and he calls this entering the 21st century. The word policy is very much in use these days. There seems to be a policy for just about everything. I've heard that the so-called developed nations are contemplating a garbage policy to send their trash on huge barges to the third world. I think we need a policy for dealing with our suffering. We do not want to condone it, but we need to find a way to make use of our suffering for our good and for the good of others. There has been so much suffering in the 20th century. 2 world wars, concentration camps in Europe, the killing fields of Cambodia, refugees from Vietnam, Central America, and elsewhere fleeing their countries with no place to land. We need to articulate a policy for these kinds of garbage also. We need to use the suffering of the 20th century as compost so that together we can create flowers for the 21st century. And if those of you know Thich Nhat Hanh, you know that he's really big into gardening and a lot of flower metaphors. So he's always talking about how garbage becomes compost and creates roses, all about kind of recycling energy. And he continues, if we are willing to work together and learn together, we can all benefit from the mistakes of our time, and seeing with the eyes of compassion and understanding, we can offer the next century, which is this century, the 21st century, a beautiful garden and a clear path. So I'd love to have our guests share just briefly, just a minute or two so that other people have time as well on your ideas about how we can ensure that we have peaceful elections in 2022. And so for this rotation, Kyle will go first, and then Andrea will close out.
Well, I think what I said previously sort of leads up to this to some degree, that we have to have social healing in order to have elections where we trust each other to have them come to valid results. But I think even more than that, what Lulu's saying about paper ballots and so on, It's kind of reminds me of the Cold War. Unfortunately, I study a lot of the Cold War. Trust but verify, okay? so you have to produce those paper ballots. If you have serial numbers where we would be empowered to check them ourselves, that would be great. Where it's like, hey, I know I voted for this county commissioner. I can punch in my serial code that only I have, and boom, there it is. There's my vote. If we use technology the right way, then we can increase trust in elections. If we use it as private for-profit actors in there that tell us what only they want to tell us, I don't think that's the way to go. I think that there has to be equal accountability for whatever companies are involved in our elections, the way that our public institutions would be. I personally don't think there should be any for-profit institutions involved, but that's me. We could have some arguments about that, but that's not the time or place for it. But I just think that the way to improve the transparency, the accountability, the paper trail, the mechanisms is very important. So I think we do things more along that line where we can check it ourselves, and we don't need like this Arizona audit people like the cyber ninjas or whatever to come in and try to save us from whatever. I think that'd be better. Like, just have it where we don't need these independent audits, and that would be great. A great start.
Appreciate you sharing that, Kyle. So more accountability and transparency in elections. I will just make one comment. As an election specialist, we really can't have numbers that allow people to track their actual ballot, because the secret ballot is what keeps us from having possibly people selling their ballots or being pressured to vote a certain way. So that's something that is always sort of, the fine line between allowing people to have secrecy of their ballot and allowing transparency of the public ballot. So anyway, small point on that. Andrea, I'd love to have your thoughts on how we ensure peaceful elections going forward.
It's really going to take a lot of work. Number one, we really do have to teach civics, and not only civics, we really have to go back to critical thinking and make certain that people have the ability to look at statement A, statement B, and reason out what makes sense and figure out what really looks like and appears to them to be the truth. We also probably need to do a lot with anger management. And then something else. One of the things that I do when I talk to people about organizing is it's really, really easy to talk to yourself. And we've really been doing a lot of talking to ourselves, especially over the last 2 years. And so if you don't talk to people who don't look like you, don't talk like you, you are giving yourself no opportunity to find out the reality of your implicit bias. Is that really true? Many members of my extended family are conservatives. So I periodically get an opportunity to have discussions with them or hear them make comments. And I will sometimes question their comment, not getting angry, but just asking a question where it makes them logically look at a situation. There were people who were very, very angry in a farming community about the possibility of, they were very angry with Mexican immigrants saying, oh, they've come over and they've taken our jobs. So my question was, they were 9,000 miles away. How did they find out about this farming job? And did they hire themselves? Where it gave people an opportunity to think about, oh, well, maybe their thought process and the way they were thinking about it wasn't really correct, but it gave them the space to think about it and perhaps arrive at a different conclusion.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So what we have there is education, anger management, and communication. Remarkably similar to some of the other comments that we've heard. Again, I really want to keep pointing out that we have more in common than we think. So I saw Kelly Lane wanted to comment. Kelly, just have about 1 minute, and then I'm going to give us, I'm going to read us a final prayer as we go out. Do you want to comment, Kelly? I have to, okay, Andrea taught me how to find this quickly. She said, I go and I look in the participants, and then I should be able to find you and ask you to unmute. I'm asking you to unmute yourself, Kelly Lane.
Okay, yes, hi.
Great.
If it's only 1 minute, it's probably not enough to get into this. And I just want to say, I'll make it as quick as possible. Before I say anything, anyone that doesn't know who I am an independent, but I've actually only voted Democrat and Green, just to tell you the flavor of my political leanings. However, I have concerns of some of what I'm hearing of that, there's all this trust of 2020 election, on the left, where 2016, no one believed it was real because of what our intelligence agencies told us, that Russia interfered. And there's been a lot of, like I sent you recently, Lulu, some evidence that came out in like CrowdStrike testimony that showed that there was never any concrete evidence that the DNC server was hacked by Russia. So I just want to say I agree. I'm glad you said what you said about that we can't, and Bennie says the same thing all the time, we can't have trust in an election one way or the other, whether it went the way you wanted or not, until our elections are transparent, trackable, and publicly verifiable. Otherwise, we're basically guessing, right? So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Lulu.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelly. That's great. So we've had prayers from the Jewish faith and the Buddhist faith, and we're going to read I'm going to speak a Christian prayer now that I hope will carry us home. And this is just a prayer of healing for all of our friends and each other. Lord, please reach down and surround my friends with supernatural peace and strength, and give them the faith to believe that all things are possible. I think that's really nice. Prayer of hope and healing for us all. And I'm going to ring the bell, and that'll be our vigil. I thank you all for attending. I will put in one small plug for us. If you like this program, if you think the work that we do is meaningful, we do very much need your financial support. And I'll put a link in the chat where you can go and you can make a donation of any amount. We would be tremendously grateful for that. And you can also just go to our website, smartelections.us, and click on donate there. So thank you so much for coming tonight, for your presence, for your deep listening, to our guests, Andrea Miller and Kyle Becker, for their honest and respectful conversation. And thank you all for being with us. And here's the bell.
I'm going to bring Bennie back on. And Andrea's still here. Great. Let's get everybody on. And let's get, I don't know who did more heavy lifting, but I'm going to pick Alana.
Come on, Alana.
So, that was our vigil. And Bennie, do you want to have any final words, since you were just listening the whole time?
I'm glad I got to see it. I followed Kyle. He's incredibly concise. It's good to hear when somebody of a different view that has been largely ostracized speaks as with so much clarity and precision of expression the way that he did. So I followed him just now. I think I get in a lot of trouble when I try to speak clear, and most people think I should hold a Democrat line, and I'm like, no, I'm just gonna run with the truth on this one. So it was really good to hear him.
That's great. You're not alone in following him. He has over 200,000 followers, so he's
Yeah, I'm pretty
he's
sure he
a
does. Yeah.
popular guy. And Andrea is, working with. I can't even
I follow
count
her
how
already.
many people. I know she told me that they're working. She told us they're working in 9 states, and they have a huge, just network
They
of
make like 2 or
people
3
that
million
they're,
phone calls in
yeah,
elections. So.
bringing more and more people into her work. So we've been very, very lucky to have both of these guests really sharing ideas, and I felt like I learned a lot both times that I heard it. Andrea, final words for us?
It was really interesting getting a chance to see this again and then to experience people's reactions to it. As I put in the chat, my son is an arch conservative, but he has many progressive beliefs, and then he has his conservative beliefs, and he's very comfortable with where he is. So one of the things he did for me when I was a lobbyist on Capitol Hill was he would always help me with conservative talking points, where he would say, if you say this to Republicans or conservatives, there's going to be an automatic reaction and they're going to be against it. But if you say it this way, then we're going to look at that and go, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. That really does make sense. When we were finding things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a huge President Obama initiative, we really were successful in fighting that back because we were able to garner a lot of Tea Party support.
Yeah, I always have to say too, people hate Trump, but Trump stopped the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That was one of the key goals of the progressive movement. So, and people refused. I never heard any progressive ever give him credit for that. It was remarkable to me because Hillary Clinton was full speed ahead on that. So yeah, there are just, if you keep your eyes and ears open, you will hear things from different points of view, and they can resonate with you. So I think that's what we're saying here. So we're going to wrap. We went much longer than we thought we would, but we really appreciate people sticking to it and really experiencing it. And we will see you back here on January 25th. Bennie, you know our slogan.
This is what democracy looks like.
That's it. And thanks so much for being part of it. We'll see you soon.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.